She's got a new book. It's called Allah, Liberty, and Love. And I should say I've known Irshad for 20 years. We've had a lot of debates, and she joins me now. Let's talk about the vote that will happen in the United Nations. Obviously, the Palestinians want recognition as a state. They've declared a state, but they need recognition from the United Nations. You've heard the Canadian position. Stephen Harper says this is not only will we not endorse the vote, but because this will be obstructive to the peace process. The U.S. has a different position. We'll get to that in a minute. What do you think of the Canadian position?
Overly simplistic. But before I go there, I want to say that the UN is a farce when it comes to advocating for anybody's human rights. Just look at the UN Human Rights Council and you see what I mean. I'm deeply disappointed that the Palestinian leadership over the last year has declared a unity pact with an obvious terrorist organization known as Hamas. But the force with which I am most disappointed, I have to say, is the Israeli government. You see, they knew that this vote would be coming. The Palestinian Prime Minister, a guy by the name of Salam Fayyad, has worked tirelessly over the last 2-3 years to clean up corruption in Palestine. He has done that for the most part. And he, in fact, announced his intention to bring this issue to the UN for the purposes of achieving statehood. What did the Israeli government do? Nada, baby. Zilch. Zero. This is incomprehensible, and worse, it is bad for the region.
And the reason some say that they don't work closely with Salam Fayyad, why? Because Hamas, he is not a viable leadership candidate, because Hamas will not accept Salam Fayyad. And you and I both know, well, he's functional on the economic side and has a diplomatic role. He is not a viable leadership post-Abbas.
Once again, overly simplistic in the sense that Fayyad, precisely because, I mean, at least you're good looking. Precisely because he is anti-corruption, he has been gaining a lot of credibility with the international community. And again, it's not like the Israeli government has not known this, but they've just folded their arms and stepped back in the hopes, I think, that really there would be no fire lit under.
If you talk to the Israelis on the other side, they're
so-called peace process,
for fear of being overly simplistic.
But still good looking.
So are you, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I've known Irshad for a long time, so we can talk like this. But, let's be clear about exactly what the Israelis have said. They've said, look, Netanyahu has said he'd like to negotiate. We can talk about their policies. But the Palestinians also haven't come to the table for 2 years.
Right.
So both sides have not come to the table. Then there's been the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. Did that drive them closer together or farther apart? Well, there you go. So where does that leave Netanyahu?
Well, first of all, precisely again, I'm going to emphasize this because most people have no clue that this is the case. The Israeli government cannot claim that they never saw this coming. Okay, what they ought to have done is when the Arab Spring began and the border between Gaza, which Hamas runs, and Egypt became that much more, insecure, the Israeli government should have cut a quick deal with the PA in the West Bank, knowing that there would be a bigger struggle to fight at its southern border. Right now, the government of Israel has allowed itself to fall into one huge mess, one huge trap, and it didn't need to go there.
But they did know it was coming.
I have higher expectations of Israel than that, precisely because I know that this pluralistic democracy called Israel is capable of better than most of the Arab states are.
I wonder if the way out of the box, you call the Canadian position too simplistic. Here's the American position. Some don't call this simplistic, they call it confusing. Here's what Obama said today.
And I am convinced that there is no shortcut to the end of a conflict that has endured for decades. Peace is hard work. Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. If it were that easy, it would have been accomplished by now.
Now, of course, we know there's a side here. They are going to reject this, the U.S., but they're going to do something called freeze it, which means it sort of lies fallow so it gets on the table in hopes that the Palestinians and the Israelis will then come together. So how do you characterize Obama's position, which is we reject it, but we're actually trying to bring it together?
Obama really doesn't have a position on this, truly, except to say that this is so not a priority for him, Israel-Palestine. The man has huge problems back home. This is not an issue that most Americans care about at all. Obviously, American Jews care deeply about it, and sure, of course, as a politician, Obama has to ensure that he courts, that segment of the population.
But are you actually arguing, and this would be shocking and probably too simplistic for even someone as good-looking as you?
Okay.
Are you arguing that the Middle East is not an important priority vis-a-vis the security of the United States?
Oh, no. I'm arguing that as a, because, I'm not that good looking, okay?
Right.
I'm arguing that as a political issue, as an issue on which to run, as an issue to articulate for the 2012 election in the United States, it's not a priority.
But it's a priority vis-a-vis American foreign policy.
Oh, of course. But
they're a little engaged in the region, let's be honest.
Listen, my handsome friend, I live in New York. Okay, I know every day what is the major issue in the United States, and that is jobs, it is the economy, nothing else exists. Obama knows that. He cannot, and he also knows that he cannot squander his energy on an issue that as cosmopolitan Canadians we care a lot about. But Americans generally
nonetheless,
don't.
look, they give Israel about $3 billion, $500 million to the Palestinians. They're engaged on a lot of levels, and a lot of this is a very important thing. We'll figure out what happens on Friday. But just your prediction. We know the Security Council won't pass it. If it goes to the General Assembly, it's not a binding vote, so it's symbolic. Does it ever make it that far? What happens on this? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it. Okay, let me be very honest. I'd be surprised if it makes it that far. I think some last-minute deal that means nothing will be cut. But if it makes it that far to the General Assembly, I do think that it would be a good thing for the vote to be passed. Why? Two reasons. One is that this part of the world has absolutely no credibility supporting, freedom and popular self-rule in the Middle East and North Africa, yet denying it for the Palestinian people, which is the mixed signal that saying no to Palestinian statehood does. And number two, I want Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, to have his money put where his mouth is. The day after a yes vote by the General Assembly to the UN, what's going to change? Nothing. And that's the point. These people have to be made accountable.
Does the ricochet effect of that embolden Hamas?
No, I don't think it does. I think that Palestinians in the West Bank are sufficiently sick and tired of the dead end that Hamas represents that really the onus now of moving forward has to be on the president of the Palestinian Authority. And keep in mind, next year is when the PA holds its next elections, okay? This is clearly something on which Mahmoud Abbas, if he's going to run again, and that's a big if, will have to run on. So something's going to have to give. It's time for the PA to step up to the plate and actually achieve what it says in rhetoric it wants to do.
I got to leave it there. Irshad Manji, the Israelis have disappointed you, the Canadians, the Americans, the Palestinians,
but
and
not you, Evan.
I joined a long parade.
You.
Irshad Manji's in town to read from Allah, Liberty, and Love. Always provocative, always very smart, always good to have you. Thanks, Irshad.
Thanks, beautiful.